So far this series, we have been interviewing a bunch of different people, and it has been extremely inspiring. Have you guys found it interesting? Yeah. And so this morning, we have the privilege of interviewing someone. I believe it is her first time on stage here at Gracegate, and she has said yes to be interviewed. So I want us to give a big warm welcome to Jasmine. Is it on? Yeah. One more time.
Let's go one more. Hello. There we go.
There we go. That's it. So, in case you guys don't know, this is Jasmine. She's been coming along. She's part of our family. Jaz, for those who don't know you, do you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you like to do, stuff like that?
Okay, so my name is Jasmine, as Walter said. I'm a primary school teacher. I've been doing that for a couple of years. I guess that's something that takes up most of my life. I guess the thing about hobbies I do is Netflix a hobby. Can I say that? Would you guys agree?
Come on.
Yeah, I guess there's not much interesting. I guess I do cheerleading, which some people would think that's interesting, but that's just been kind of my life. Like,
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So cheerleading, do you mind telling us a little bit, because from what I've heard, you don't just do cheerleading, you are in the New Zealand squad
Yes.
for cheerleading.
Yes. So, thank you. I've been doing cheerleading most of my life. I started off jazz dancing when I was 2. I got a little bit bored of that, so I moved on to something else. I found cheerleading. If you don't know cheerleading, which I guess it's something that's still not really big yet, but cheerleading is basically like gymnastics, but we also throw people up. So it's a little bit cooler. I guess I got into that when I was about 7. So I've been doing it for a long time, 23 now, so quite a few years. I was one of the first people to do cheerleading in New Zealand, which is quite cool. And yeah, I guess I've been doing it for ages. I've gone to Worlds a few times. We were the first out of American team to get first at the Worlds in Orlando. So that was pretty cool.
Nice.
Thanks. But I guess it's something that's taken up a lot of my life. I kind of didn't expect it to be like this. I had 4 years off a while ago. I've just kind of got back into it now. Unexpectedly getting back into Team New Zealand. So trainings are intense, but it's good.
Cool. So obviously you have a full-time job being a teacher, and then you do that on the side, just casually. What does like an average week look like for you, especially now after being away for 4 years, getting back into cheerleading?
Yeah, so I kind of, coming back, I expected it not to be this intense because I haven't done it doing a full-time job. I think teaching, I guess some people don't realize teaching is, it takes up most of your life anyway. So I have trainings 4 times a week, and in part of Team New Zealand, we have to train like an extra hour by ourselves every day. So it's, 7 days a week. We have intense trainings 3 times a week with like extra classes and things like that. So it is quite intense. People are kind of laughing. I think lots of the time I'm sitting at the gym cutting out resources for my kids, and it's quite funny because I think I'm now one of the eldest in the team, and I tell people I'm a really old cheerleader, and people don't believe me. They're like, "You're 23, you're really young," but the girl I was throwing up, she's there training even longer than I am, and I said, "How do you do it?" She said, "Oh, I'm 14." Oh, okay. So I guess it's a lot. Yeah. So I think I'm still struggling myself to try and work things out like that.
Cool. That's quite surprising to me, given that you're 23, that you are one of the oldest in the team. I guess with 14-year-olds and younger people in the team, how do you kind of see your role within the team beyond just cheerleading, but also coaching and mentoring and leading?
I guess what's quite cool, I think, taking 4 years off and coming back as a mature cheerleader, it's quite cool seeing yourself, because these girls, I think, girls and guys, we're a co-ed team, they're full-on cheerleading. I guess that's their life. They go to school, they do cheerleading, that's their whole entire life. I think what's quite cool now is I see myself in them. I look at them and say, well, how do you have so much time to do that? But I guess it's now taking what's quite cool, a leadership role in the team, so I'm there to kind of support and encourage. Especially there's still, which is quite sad, there's still quite a big stereotype about cheerleaders. And I know when I was growing up and my dad's dad would tell us, workmates that I was a cheerleader, they'd kind of, like give them kind of that look. They think of bringing on cheerleaders or Warriors cheerleaders who aren't cheerleaders. Warriors cheerleaders not the same. But I think it's quite cool now being that encouraging person for these girls who are going through a lot, because cheerleading is something, it is a sport in America. It's now been said it's one of the most dangerous sports in the world, on top of American football. Wow. But it's quite scary because the girls, it's scary looking because I guess every kid, every teenager goes through it, but it's that extra, I guess, appearance in cheerleading. So it's quite scary. These girls are, I don't really know how to explain it, but it's like they're down on themselves. They're like, well, I've got to look a certain way. I've got to be a certain person. So I think it's stopping that stereotype and being a leader to say, hey, it's actually a sport. And I guess encouraging the community to say, hey, we're cheerleaders. We train hard. We train to win. We train to compete. And it's not just let's look pretty on stage and do flips.
Yeah, that's cool. Love that. My next question, and I hope it's okay asking, but you shared with me a little bit about kind of your journey, even growing up in terms of faith, and what it was like coming to Graysgate for the first time a few months ago. A year ago? About a year ago. Do you mind sharing with us what did your kind of faith journey look like growing up, and how was it that first time walking into these doors?
Okay, so growing up, my family were very, very against religion. So I went to Bible studies at school, not really knowing much, but my parents would always say, you can go to Bible studies at school, but don't bring anything home. Don't want to hear about it. Really don't want anything to do with it. So I guess my whole life, that's what it's been. And it wasn't until I was thankful that Dino and I met and he brought me along to Graysgate. And I think the first time I took along a friend with me because it was a very scary thing. I guess the only church that I'd seen is on American TV, which is not a representation of what it is that I know now. Yeah. But it was scary. I think even now, it's still, I think, quite nerve-wracking. And although I've been here a year, probably lots of you haven't seen me for a year. I've been here, kind of lurking in the background. But it's not till recently that I've started, going to life groups during the week. I've started volunteering. I've started doing a lot more. And I think what's quite cool, as Walter and I were talking about the other day, is it's kind of a ripple effect. So for me, it's still something I'm still going along my journey of faith. It's something that I'm, finding out. But it's, I think, feeling, I think we're talking about, it was like Bear Grylls we're talking about, wasn't it? About that feeling in your stomach. I think finding that fear or that anxiety in your stomach and actually doing something about it. So for a whole year, and it's the same with cheerleading, it's that stepping out, doing something extra. And I think you can relate that to anything. It's not just religion, it's not just cheerleading, it's to do with everything. So what's quite cool is I've gone with that feeling of taking a step out. I'm here today speaking, which is something if you know me, I talk a lot anyway, but coming on stage and talking is something different. But I think what I've found really helpful is going against that feeling, and it's actually kind of made a ripple effect. Like coming to Graysgate, I've only probably been, doing a lot more the past couple of months, and that's when I've started cheerleading. The confidence outside has been a lot bigger, and I think it's just, I want people to know that you've got to take that next step, and as hard as it is and as scary as it might be, it's taking that step to do anything and just going for it, because I think I'm so grateful now that I've done so much. I've gotten back into cheerleading. It's so much of a different experience, and yeah.
I love that. And just lastly, because it's so interesting, this week you shared with me that even coming to Graysgate has kind of helped you gain confidence in taking cheerleading on again. But I guess, and you've touched on it, but just finally, is there anything that you feel like you've kind of been learning over the last few months, especially here at Graysgate, but just in life in general, that you feel like you're kind of working through at the moment?
I think, so I struggle a lot with anxiety. I have, past couple of years, it's been quite hard. And I think something that's quite helped me a lot is I've found nothing's really helped. People, I think, and that you find more people that feel the same thing. And I think it's really hard to find that thing that helps. You go to people to help. You take medication to try and help with anxiety. But I think the big thing is finding somewhere where you feel like you belong, finding something that you do, a place. And even if it isn't Graysgate, even if it isn't a sport for you, I think it's just so important finding that place that will then, I guess, create a domino effect for the rest of your life. Because I think I'm seeing things so much differently, and everything I do has so much more meaning after coming here. I think talking to all of you guys, it's just, I think it's like a sense of belonging somewhere. And I think the hardest thing, I think, as a teacher as well, I want my students to find that sense of belonging wherever it might be, doing whatever that might be. And then you can see it, I guess, create that domino effect of everything so much more positive and so much more meaning to what you do.
Yeah, that's so good. Love it. Jess shared with me that when she walked in these doors, I mean, imagine if, and it might be a lot of people's reality, never been to a church before, but she felt part of the family, that you felt like you belonged here. And we really want to thank you for coming up on stage today. We consider you part of the family here, but also like it takes a lot of courage, especially what you shared about your anxiety coming up here. But you kind of saw it as your next step, what you're going to take, sharing with us. So I think we're all very grateful, and thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Cool. Can we give her a big round?
Thank you.
Alrighty. So we've been talking about this guy called Nehemiah for the last 5 weeks. And if you haven't been here, we kind of chatted about Nehemiah and this wall that he's been building. And it's interesting because I think if I had to ask this morning, and I won't ask it just in case it doesn't go according to plan, but if you had to put up your hand this morning, if you kind of at the start of this series were struggling with this idea of what is the purpose in life? How do I find out the purpose for which I'm here? And as a result of this series, you now know exactly what you want to do with your life, what you should be doing, what God has called you to do, and you're already halfway there getting to that point. Then I think very few, if any of us, would be able to put our hand up to that. And have you ever thought, why is that? Why, if God wants us to live this life of purpose and meaning and influence, why is it so hard to figure out what the purpose of our life is, right? Like if we have this vision and we will live a life of drive and influence when we have that vision, why do we sometimes lack vision so much in our life despite seeking it? And this idea of kind of living a life of purpose, and especially finding this one elusive purpose, is constantly reinforced by the culture in which we live. I did a quick Google search this week, and I think I searched just purpose or purpose in life or something like that. And there's a bunch of quotes that came up that I thought was quite interesting. Mark Twain said, "The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why." The next one is said, "When you find your why, you don't hit snooze no more, you find a way to make it happen." I haven't found a way to make it happen because that snooze button is my best friend pretty much every morning. But another quote that I found said this: "Your purpose in life is to find your purpose and give your heart and soul to it." And I don't know exactly what that even looks like, but these are the kind of quotes we see around us all the time. And then lastly, Oprah said this: "There's no greater gift you can give or receive than to honor your calling. It's why you were born and how you become most truly alive." Now, I mean, these are all great quotes, and I think we can all relate to this idea of finding a purpose being very important in how we live our life. The reality is sometimes this is a great idea, but it's really hard in practice, right? Like, how do we honor a calling if we don't even know what our calling is? How do we live a life of purpose when we don't know what the purpose of our life is? And I think the reason why this tension is so prevalent in my life is because I meet a lot of people who either they have this very specific thing that they think they were created for, and it's really good things. It's I want to be a good parent. I want to I don't know, be a good businessman. I want to be retired. It's things we strive for, but often that's so far in our future that it's hard to kind of link our everyday day-to-day life with a purpose that seems so distant. And a lot of us find ourselves feeling frustrated in our everyday mundane life because it does seem so far disconnected from a life of purpose and vision that we thought we were going to live. And so the question that we want to be asking today is really this: how do we live a life of purpose in those seasons that we're we don't even know what our purpose in life is. And to be honest with you, at times during this series of Nehemiah, I found it a little bit hard to relate to him. And the reason is because Nehemiah is this man with a vision, right? Like God gave him this vision of building this wall. He's got a purpose for his life, and he's working every day to accomplish this purpose. But I kind of feel like Nehemiah doesn't know what it feels like to wake up in the morning and do everyday jobs in the mundane reality of life, when you don't know why you were created, when you don't know what the purpose of the season is. And so I found it a little bit hard to relate to Nehemiah. But then I did some calculations this week, and I'd be interested to know, does anyone know how old Nehemiah was when he died? Does anyone know? Does anyone want to take a guess? How long did Nehemiah live for? Anyone want to take a guess? 45. 127. Well, the reality is, no one knows exactly, and so you might be right, you're probably wrong, Shazza, but no one knows exactly, but it is likely that he lived a full life, just from historical documents. And then last week, Wes shared with us that it took Nehemiah how long to complete the wall? 52 days. So it took Nehemiah 52 days to complete the wall. And then I did some calculations. That means if Nehemiah, and no one knows exactly, but if he lived, if he died when he was 70 years old, that meant that 52 days out of 25,550 days were spent building the wall. That is 0.2% of Nehemiah's life was actually spent building this wall. And we've been talking about this wall the entire series, and I kind of figured this wall is the big purpose of Nehemiah's life. But really the only thing this wall was a responsibility that Nehemiah had for a very short season of his life. And not only that, but I found out this week that actually for even within that responsibility, that 52 days, as Nehemiah was building this wall, Nehemiah didn't actually have the luxury of knowing the entire reason why this wall was being built. Now, last week, Wes shared with us that on the other side of the wall, Nehemiah could kind of sense that this wall would bring protection for the people, for his people. And that's true. But there was a purpose that was even bigger than that. Because we continue reading this story, and I'll just summarize it. But as this wall was complete, so last week we shared how they completed the wall, but actually then the people and the nation started to gather on the other side of the wall. And as they kind of gathered and came together, they realized that actually our life is not going that great. We are slaves where we are right now, and things are not going so great. And so they decided that they actually want to turn back to living the way God wanted them to live. They actually want to commit to having this relationship with God again. And so after the wall is completed, this is what they said and prayed to God. They said, God, you have been righteous in all that has come upon us, for you have dealt faithfully, and we have acted wickedly. And then they say this, we are slaves this day in the land that you gave to our fathers to enjoy its fruits and its good gifts. Behold, we are slaves. So they say to God, God, you actually wanted us to live a good life. You wanted to bless us, and we have turned our backs on you because we thought somehow our lives would be more free if we did. Turns out we just became slaves, and we actually want to commit and have a relationship with you. And so on the other side of this wall was more than just protection for the people. It was actually an entire nation turning back to God. But what's interesting, Nehemiah had no idea that this was going to happen when he was building the wall. And so it turns out the wall was only a catalyst to get an entire nation back to God. So why is this important? I guess the thing I'm worried about is as we're journeying through the series, because that's what I thought, is that that somehow Nehemiah knew exactly what the purpose of his life was, and that's why he built the wall. But this wall was actually simply a responsibility that he had in his life for a short season, and also that he had no idea what lied on the other side of that wall. Now, I was chatting to one of the Radiate leaders this week, and it's interesting because I don't know about you, but but before I start building a wall, I want to know exactly the purpose of that wall. I don't like to do stuff if I don't know why I'm doing it. And so I was chatting to one of the Radiate leaders, and they shared with me that when I had asked them if they wanted to be a Radiate leader, they had no idea why I asked them, because they didn't particularly enjoy working with kids. They didn't think they were good at that. They actually said they felt like they didn't know how to talk to kids. And but they, and I love what Jazz shared. It's very similar. And then they just kind of said, yes, I'm going to give it a go and see what happens. And they shared with me this week that became the most significant way in which they grew their relationship with God during that season. And they had incredible influence in the lives of these kids. But the reason I have so much respect for that, and same with what Jazz shared this morning, is because I really struggle to build a wall if I don't know what's on the other side of it. And so when I finished school, I knew I kind of had to go and study something. That was just the culture in which I was brought up. You kind of had to go and study if you wanted to secure a future. And so I knew I had to go and study. I had no idea what I wanted to do, except I had a long list of things I didn't want to do. And so it really was a process of elimination. And I just kind of, I think I would be the world's worst engineer or doctor or pretty much anything that you can think of. And so the only thing that seemed vaguely interesting to me was psychology. And actually, no, it looked pretty interesting to me. But the reason is because I wanted to do sports psychology, just because I loved sport, and so I figured I'd combine the two. But as I was kind of studying this, it really wasn't, I enjoyed it, but I knew that's not what I wanted to do. And I was confused. And at so many times along the journey, I wanted to give up because I just didn't see how it was going to fit in the long term. And but it's interesting, then I kind of finished that up, and then I still had no idea what I wanted to do. And so, but because I finished that, I kind of, the next opportunity opened up, and I got into the social work course, which I managed to do. And then I still had no idea what I wanted to do after that. But along the journey, I met a guy that you may know as Wesley Lorenz. And it's interesting because that's how I kind of started playing footy and got introduced to Gracegate. But I look back now and I think, you know what, like, even getting to this stage, I was doing a bunch of stuff that I had no idea what it actually meant, and I was just so discouraged along the journey. But it's only looking backward that some of that kind of makes a little bit more sense. And I think that's why I've got so much respect for Nehemiah now, because he was building a wall, and he had no idea what was going to happen as a result of it. And I think we can all relate, even in our everyday lives. It's kind of like, whether it's changing diapers for us, or whether it's raising a kid, or driving kids around to school, or mowing the lawns here at Gracegate, or just being friendly to people around us. It's often the small everyday things that we get tasked to do, but we don't know where it's going to lead to. And as I kind of came to this realization, I realized that this entire story about Nehemiah is not really about the wall. The wall wasn't even the main purpose. That was a responsibility, but actually, as he was faithful and actually completing the small, everyday, mundane things, a life of incredible influence and purpose unfolded on the other side of the wall. In this past week, I was watching a movie. Geordie introduced me to it. It's called The Imitation Game. Have you guys, who's seen that movie? It's on Netflix. A few of you guys, but it's worth watching. But it's about this guy, and it's based on a true story. Alan Turing, and he was British, and so he was recruited by Britain during the war to break this Enigma code that the Germans used. So the Germans, they were busy winning the war, and they had this Enigma code that they would communicate all their messages through. And it was believed to be impossible to break this code because it had 159 million different settings that was changed every 24 hours. And so the Americans, the Russians, the French, heaps of countries had tried to break it, and it was believed to be impossible. And so Turing and his team kind of worked on a machine that would break this code. And I don't want to spoil the movie, but you probably already know that from history, that they did end up breaking the code. But it's interesting because they were tasked with this responsibility of trying to break this German code. But in the process, it is estimated that they saved around 14 million people's lives during the war as a result of the intel that they gathered. Then after the war, it changed the culture in which we live in today just because of the outcome of the war itself. But then the machine that they designed to break the code, Turing referred to it as a digital computing machine, which we know today as the computer. And so that was actually the first computer that was designed. But it's interesting, Turing had this task, this responsibility of breaking a code, and as a result, 14 million people's lives were saved during the war, and the entire culture in which we live in today looks different as a result of that responsibility. And I find it interesting that Steve Jobs, whose entire life work as a result of what Turing did, then said later on, this incredible visionary, he said, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. And it's interesting because I always think of Steve Jobs, he's this man with a vision, right? But even him, he had to build a wall sometimes that he didn't know what was on the other side of, and trust that somehow it would connect and have a purpose in the future. There's a story about a little boy, and you may have heard it. And the context for the story is Jesus was actually teaching and healing and helping people. And as he did that, this massive crowd started to gather. And so it just became more and more. And it said that there were 5,000 men, probably about 10,000 people in total that gathered as Jesus was teaching and healing. And they soon ran into a problem because they realized that people became hungry and they had to feed these people. So Jesus asked his disciples, what do you guys think we should do? And their response is interesting because I think it's very similar to ours. The first thing they said is, actually, what we have, like even a year's wages won't be enough to feed these people. So what we have really isn't enough. What we have is far too insignificant. And then this little boy showed up, and what he had in his hand was a lunchbox. Now, this is Jesse Lee's lunchbox. This boy probably didn't have a pink lunchbox, but he had a little lunchbox, and in it were 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And what he did was he actually decided to give it to the disciples, to give to Jesus, to hand out to these people. And so as Jesus starts handing out the bread and the fish, it just kind of keeps getting more and more until everyone in the crowd gets fed and there's food left over. Now, I don't know if you believe that story. If you are new to faith and church, you might find that really hard to believe. And that's okay, regardless whether you believe that or not. I think it has incredible practical applications for our life. Because see, this boy, that morning when he woke up, he probably didn't think he was going to change the world in any significant way or change thousands of people's lives. But all he had was something incredibly insignificant in his hands. And so he decided, unlike the disciples, to offer the seemingly insignificant, everyday, mundane things, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, into the hands of Jesus. And that actually became something that God used to change thousands of people's lives that day. But it's interesting because I'm sure on other days the boy would have also been kind enough to hand out his lunch. But on those days, it didn't change lots of people's lives. But he decided he's going to live his life with this posture of giving, of serving, of loving people, of the everyday, ordinary, Monday things that he's going to do well, and trust that God will expand and multiply the influence through the ordinary, everyday, little things that he's doing. Now as I think about history, and whether it's modern history or even long ago, as you look story upon story in the Bible, you have ordinary people. And so I think of this woman that even, for this little boy, it was a lunchbox. But for another woman, it was a few small coins that she had in her hand. And she didn't think it was significant. No one else thought it was significant. And yet she decided to live with this posture of giving and serving. And Jesus said that is significant to him because of the posture in which he's giving and serving. There was another woman hundreds of years before that who only had a little bit of oil, but she decided to again give it with this posture of serving and giving, and God used it to multiply her influence. Even if we think of David and Goliath, I mean, this is a guy, a little boy with a little slingshot and stones who killed a giant, but that only happened as a result of him actually taking food to his brother and serving and loving people in the everyday, ordinary ways in life. And so as I look at all these stories and even modern day examples of people that God has used to do great things, it was ordinary people, but one thing we often hear, and you may have heard this as well, I hear this all the time, that God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things for God, right? Like, you guys may have heard that before. I hear it all the time. But you know what? As I'm looking at all these stories, I'm more inclined to think that maybe God's not looking for ordinary people to do extraordinary things for him, but instead for ordinary people who will do the ordinary things with him. And somehow he will supply something more extraordinary out of our small, everyday, mundane things in life. And to be honest, I can't really relate to that first statement that much, and chances are you can't either, because our lives are often so ordinary, they're everyday things, and yet all God ever wants for us is to actually surrender and give what we have, and he will multiply our influence. I see it at Gracegate all the time. I talk about the worship team a lot, but I've got so much respect for these guys giving up every Thursday night, Saturday morning, building a wall that they don't know what's on the other side of it. Have you ever thought about that? These guys practice, I don't know how many hours a week. They have no idea whether anyone's going to connect with the songs, but they invest in building a wall, and they don't know if people are going to connect, but they're trusting that there is something significant on the other side of the wall. The same with our youth leaders here at Grayscale. Like, I see the Radiate leaders, and they show up every second Friday, and sometimes the kids act crazy. Sometimes it feels like you're making a difference, and sometimes it doesn't. But they build a wall that they have no idea if it's making a difference, trusting that God will take the small, everyday things in their life and somehow make something significant out of that. And what I realized, that a life of purpose is actually the thing that lies on the other side of us honoring our everyday responsibilities. To close off today, I want to share one last story with you, and the reason I want to share this is because I'm hoping it would be encouraging to you, especially if you find yourself often discouraged because you see the everyday reality of your life, and somehow the insignificance, the seemingly insignificance of it doesn't match up to a life of vision and purpose that you had imagined. It's probably one of the, if not my favorite passage in the entire Bible, but it's where Jesus teaches, and it's a prophecy that he gives for what will happen one day. And this is what Jesus says. He says, when the Son of Man, referring to himself, comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on this glorious throne. Pretty much all he's saying is, one day I will return. I will come back. Life as we know it today will end, and I'm going to come back. And then he says, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. Now, it's all very metaphorical and possibly confusing, but pretty much Jesus just says, he separates two groups of people, and he says to the one, come, I have prepared something for you. And the big question is, on what basis did that separation take place? What was so significant about this group? And then Jesus teaches, I think, one of the most incredible principles in the entire Bible. And he says this, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. And then the people replied, then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry? And when did we feed you? When did we see you thirsty and give you something to drink? I think if we did that, we would have remembered Jesus. When did all of this happen? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you in sick or in prison and go to visit you? You're Jesus. You don't need anything from us. When did all of this happen? And then the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. And you know what I find most interesting about this story is the response of the people. Because this is what they were saying. They said, God, when did we see you hungry and feed you? When did we see you thirsty? When did all of this take place? See, because whatever they did didn't seem significant at the time. Like these people probably didn't even thank them. They probably didn't get a party hosted for them at prison to thank them for what they're doing. The person they fed probably didn't, become like president and thank them in a speech or something. It didn't seem significant at the time. It was everyday, ordinary things that they did, and it didn't feel significant, and it didn't even feel spiritual. It didn't feel like God was in it somehow. It just felt like everyday, ordinary things that they were doing. And then I love Jesus' response when he says, the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me. It was the everyday things. It was the ordinary things. It was changing those diapers. It was taking those kids to school. It was packing lunch boxes. It was mowing the lawns. It was smiling at someone at the counter, engaging in a conversation, walking across the room to someone who's lonely. It was the small things. It was, for Nehemiah, it was the nails and the hammer that he had in his hand. And he built a wall that he had no idea what it would lead to. It was the small things. It was the everyday things. It was the mundane things. And Jesus is saying, they may have not been significant to anyone else, but they were significant to me. And it may not have felt like I was in those things. It may not have felt spiritual in the moment, but I was in those moments. You did those things, those small things, those little things, those everyday things that had a bigger impact than you realized even in your whole entire life. And so today, if you're feeling a little bit discouraged that your life is small, I think we all feel that way sometimes, and we feel like what we have and what we do is extremely ordinary, especially in light of a big vision and a purpose that we had for our lives, or that we have for our lives, then I hope there is some encouragement in these words of Jesus, that if we would honor our responsibilities that we currently have, as small as they may seem, and if we would meet the needs of people around us when we're able, that even if we struggle to know exactly what our purpose is, that we will live a life of purpose, not because of the big things, the lofty things, the huge visions that we have, but because of the responsibilities and the needs that we see in our everyday life. So today, God, we just thank you that you are in those moments, those everyday moments, those moments that seem insignificant, those moments that we feel ready to give up. God, in those jobs that we do that doesn't seem to make a difference, those people we try to help and it doesn't seem to make a difference. We sometimes don't even get a thank you, God, for the kids that we're trying to raise, for the diapers that we're changing, for the jobs that we're doing. Sometimes it seems small and insignificant, God, but I thank you today that you are in those moments. And I pray for every single person here today that we would all leave encouraged, knowing that you're not just in the big things in life, God. You're in the lunchbox, you're in the hammer and the nails, you're in the small stones in the slingshot, you're in the little bit that we do, God, every day, the small things, the Monday things, and you honor us when we honor you with the little things in our life. So So I pray today that we would leave here encouraged, knowing that those things matter to you, God, because we matter to you. So I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.